Hello everyone, my name is Cathy Jenkins and I'm the Director of the Archbishop's Office for Evangelisation here in Melbourne. I'm also coordinating the Plenary project for the Archdiocese. Last week, Shane Healy and I sat down for a conversation about the Plenary process, and before you view that conversation, I'd like to invite you to an event next Thursday evening, the 30th of August, where the Knox Deanery are hosting at St Francis Xavier Montmorency an evening with Father Noel Connolly. Father Noel is the facilitator of the Plenary Conference on the facilitation team, and it'll be a wonderful opportunity to gather with him and to hear his thoughts about this process. There'll also be an opportunity for some listening and dialogue. So Thursday the 30th of August, St Francis Xavier Montmorency at 7:30 p.m.
Well, it's a pleasure to welcome Cathy Jenkins, the Director of the Archbishop's Office for Evangelisation. And Cathy, we're going to talk today about the Plenary Council. The process is underway. You're the Archdiocesan Coordinator.
I am, yes. So that really entails making sure that we're animating the process, not just through parishes, but through all other avenues of archdiocesan life. So we're sort of at the beginning stages, really.
Well, that's perfectly put, because as I think I heard in a very famous Julie Andrews musical, let's start at the very beginning. And we are really in the early stages of this Plenary Council. Just for those people who maybe as yet haven't got their head right around what it is and what it's trying to achieve, can you just take us in a fairly simple manner through how it's been set up, what your role is here at the Melbourne end, and then what is going to be happening moving forward?
Yes. Well, it's 80 years since Australia had a Plenary Council, and really it's the highest gathering of all of the churches. So we're in the first of a 3-year process,
right,
in the listening and dialogue phase, which means that we are having the opportunity to shape the agenda for what the Plenary Council meetings in 2020 and 2021 might actually talk about.
Okay.
So that means that all parishes and organisations have the opportunity to enter into what's called this listening and dialogue phase. So in the last couple of weeks we've had some briefings around Melbourne, and the purpose of those briefings has really been to try and help people understand what the process is. And one of the learnings for me has been that once people actually work through this process, they come to a better understanding of what it's about.
That's interesting. So I've actually had a meeting myself where this document was given to the group, and it talks about pray, reflect, talk, share. And it was a very interesting little process. So take us through a bit more of that and what you've found in your 2 or 3 meetings.
Well, first of all, we've done a bit of just introductory work around what is a Plenary Council and why are we having it. And then I invite people to participate in the process. And initially you can see people thinking, but actually once they start, they're very engaged with it.
Right.
So it's very much a sort of a discernment process, which is why some elements of the process, which is including silence and prayer, are so important.
Right.
So we encourage people to start with a prayer, to take a moment of silence to gather their thoughts, to write themselves, and then to share stories. So it's a 3 or 4 step process, and at the very end of the process, participants, after they've chosen one topic to discuss,
yes,
are invited to upload their response to the Plenary Council website. So the question we're being asked is...
very important and a very broad one, isn't it?
Yes, what is God asking of us in Australia at this time? And there have been lots of comments about why that question, and it's been a fairly carefully discerned question. And I think something that surprises people is that when you ask a question about what is it that God is wanting, sometimes it's different to what I personally might think. And it's not just asking what is God wanting of me, but of us. So it's a question about the church community or the community in Australia generally. So it is an open-ended question, which is its strength, and for some people its weakness.
So are you finding in these meetings you've had so far in parishes, and I know there's another one coming up later in August, we'll talk about that, are you finding some people that just want to get straight on to there should be women priests, or what's happening with the seal of confession, or those big things, or does it start out with much smaller things, and does it build? What have you found so far?
Often those sorts of topics are the initial topics people want to talk about. But then when they've had a bit of time to sit and reflect a bit more deeply, sometimes it's different things. It might be, why can't the process be a little bit more transparent about how priests are appointed in the parish, for example?
Okay.
Or
Yep.
what can we do to try and encourage more lay people to be involved? So the questions become, I guess, a lot broader than single topic questions. So in this process of setting the agenda for the council, it is thought that the themes will vary between being very broad and narrow. So an example might be, for example, not just women priests, but what is ministry going to look like for us as we move into the future? I think also there is a sense amongst some people, a little bit of concern about whether or not we'll go through this process and whether or not the bishops will listen. And Mark Coleridge has spoken about this quite a bit, and he's talking about the bishops also being on a journey of listening with us and also to lay people. So there is a sense that the bishops are wanting to listen with, and that's being driven a little bit also by Pope Francis and this idea of a synodal or a listening church. That the sense of the faithful, the baptised, all of the baptised, that we want to listen to what it is that the baptised are wanting to say about God's presence in the world. So there is a little bit of cynicism around that. So when that question's raised, which it has been on all three occasions, I must admit I just say that the older I get, the less certain I become about anything really. And all we can do is trust in the information we have at the moment, and that information is telling us that the bishops have done a very brave thing actually in entering into this process. And so I think on that basis we need to be supportive of them and their hopes for it as well.
And I think it would be reasonable to say we would all expect the Holy Spirit to be guiding this entire process, and that takes some faith and some real hope. But I think hope is a pretty great word here, because I think a lot of people now would like to hear you try to explain how a seed might be born at one of these meetings in parishes and might end up as an agenda item in 2020. So two-part question: the seeding process, and then who will be at those meetings? Will it just be bishops?
Okay, so just to take the first question or the first issue first, every single person has the opportunity to answer that question and upload their response either as an individual or as after a group has gone through the process.
Let's say. Yep.
So, and perhaps if we just talk about the parish experiences, parishes are doing it in a whole lot of different ways. Some parishes are wanting to put in a parish response in addition to perhaps separate groups. So the process itself, usually you need a group of maybe 4, and you might choose one topic to discuss, and as a result of that topic you would supply an answer to the question. But that group might talk about 2 or 3 topics over the course of a few weeks. So it's not just you have one go and that's it.
Right.
And if you're an individual and wanted to air an issue, you could also do that as an individual.
Right.
So it's a pretty open process at that level.
And when you say download, I mean, how do people get? How do people get to that point?
Yes, so you go onto the Plenary website, which is just plenary.org.au, or we can make sure we've got that on the video, and you go through a series of 3 steps, and then you have 500 words to upload your thoughts about the question, and that goes to the Pastoral Research Office and managing all of the data.
Which is a national group?
Yes.
See.
And from that, general themes will emerge. Every single response will be read, and there's a group of 8 people working as part of the Plenary Council facilitation team who get weekly updates on responses and who have access to reading all of the material. So an important part of the process are the stories that people will bring with their topic. And it's very powerful when you hear people talking about their stories.
I can imagine.
Being Catholic.
Yes.
And some of the stories are painful and some of the stories are really joyful. Certainly in the last week or so, there's a lot of conversation around the Royal Commission and the abuse crisis. That's caused a lot of pain
Yes.
and anxiety for Catholics generally, I think. So there's a lot of conversation around that. There's a lot of conversation around the role of the laity in the church and what is that going to look like as we move into the future. And bearing in mind that it is a hierarchical church, what's that going to look? How do we manage a hierarchical sort of context, but also enable the voice of all the faithful?
And the second part to my question was, when it gets to 2020 and these
Yes.
two large meetings,
Yes.
who's at those and who then decides around this wad of material that surely is going to be built up?
Well, there's a middle step before we get to the meeting, and that is that we also have a year of discernment. So once Ash Wednesday concludes the period of listening and dialogue.
Early next year?
Early next year. And after that, themes will be grouped and papers will be written around the theme. So when I was at a meeting recently about this, the plenary facilitation team are thinking there might be 10 to 12 themes.
I see.
So around each of those themes, a theological paper or reflection will be written drawing on all aspects of the tradition. There will be ongoing feedback throughout this process, so people will get a sense of what sorts of themes are being offered, and those themes will then set the agenda for the council.
So in that second phase that you just explained, who does make those judgments in terms of progressing the discernment?
Yes, so the facilitation team will go through their own discernment process in terms of what themes have emerged.
Right.
And a lot of that will be based on the data that they receive through the process. The groups that then will be involved to flesh out that information, people will be invited to apply to be part of those groups.
Oh, excellent.
So it'll be that'll be another process that'll be set in place towards the end of this year, I imagine.
And will run across most of 2019.
Yes. And then once the agenda is decided for the council, there are a few canon law requirements. So for example, all bishops, all vicars general, there's a group of other people who are required to attend. And then there are some people that can be invited to attend, and they include priests and lay people. So voting rights are with the people that must attend, and all of that information is available on the website. But this is where I think it's really important to take into our hearts the work of the words, for example, of Archbishop Mark. He would say that part of the role of the bishops at that meeting is to have been part of the listening, and to be really listening to the sensus fidei, or the sense of the faithful. So I wouldn't want people to think that the bishops are just going to get there and just tick and cross things. It's very much, they also are part of this discernment process, and they also, I'm sure, are thinking very deeply about these questions. So this has come up a lot when I've been talking with people.
Sure.
So I think this is where we do have to trust in the work of the Spirit, as I know that the bishops are in implementing this process. Archbishop Mark, for example, would say that it's time for us to be making big and bold decisions. And I think that's the sort of spirit with which we need to enter into the process.
Well, Cathy Jenkins, thank you. That was a really interesting discussion. And folks, as you get along in your parishes, you might become familiar with this document and enjoy your process as you take part in the Plenary Council as it evolves over the next 2 or 3 years. Cathy, thank you.
Thank you, Shay.